Welcome to the Get Trauma Informed podcast, dedicated to unraveling the complexities of trauma, its pervasive impact, and the journey towards holistic recovery and realignment. If your radiance has ever felt muted, like I and thousands of others, you're in the right place to reignite your inner light. I'm your host, Wellness Coach Liz Blanding, and this is the Get Trauma Informed podcast. Welcome to our second installation. We had an amazing conversation on yesterday with Coach Rufus Carpenter. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking, by the way. And you?
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm really excited about what we're doing here with the Beyond the Battlefield of Trauma series. You know, it's very, very personal to me because we're sharing our experiences and just working through what it's like to live the experience of post-traumatic stress and complex PTSD. And I have gotten feedback on some of our other episodes that briefly sort of touched on the topics. But now that we're doing this deep dive into the subject, I think it's going to do a lot of good for a lot of people. So again, I thank you for being here today, and I thank you for sharing your stories with us.
Okay.
So we're going to get into the topic today. We're going to talk a little bit about still staying on the topic of post-traumatic stress and the differences in complex PTSD. We talked about military PTSD and civilian complex PTSD. We're going to start with my story today as far as just a little bit. I can't give you all of it because, my third book actually is due out on my birthday, which is July 1st. It'll be Pathway to Trauma Recovery, and it's a conglomeration or what I want to say. Two words are coming in together at the same time, but it's a collaborative project with over 14 different authors all over the United States, all over the world, actually, that came together to share their stories with us. So I'm just going to give a little bit about my chapter in the book, and it does go into my story, and it goes back from as far as how complex PTSD, it layers. So it stacks of PTSD. So when we talk about the PTSD portion, just if you will, think about what it's like to have stacks of PTSD on top of each other, which now forms the complex PTSD. And, I've learned the thing here is to embrace it instead of running from it or hiding from it. I've learned to embrace it. So I say now, as I've gone through the recovery process, I understand that my person met my purpose, and now you have passion. And that's what this whole movement is about, the passion to become more aware and to be more of a trauma-informed society. And so, just getting into my story a little bit. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Carpenter, for your story yesterday. It was absolutely when you talked about, your experience in military PTSD and that story there. So if our listeners, if you have not listened to the first installment of the Beyond the Battlefield of Trauma, Overcoming Military PTSD and Civilian CPTSD, it may be a good idea to go back and listen to the first episode in this series. So in getting into, again, the pathway to trauma recovery is the name of the book. And in that book, I talk about what it's like to, from a child experience trauma, right? And my trauma actually started from the womb because my mother, I'm a product of a family of domestic violence. So my mother was being abused while I was being formed in her womb, if you will. So even at that stage, there's an effect that happens where when we talk about a person being shattered or fragmented, the baby's brain can't come together and form properly because of all of the stress, all of the chemicals, that chemical reaction that's going on because the mom is always in stress. So her being in stress, it does transfer to the baby. And in my case, that was my situation. In the book, I talk about, and we're going to get a little deep today, and I don't mind being transparent because I think that's the only way to be able to actually help. In my formative years, when I was 3 years old, my mother's estranged husband stabbed her in front of myself and my sister. So we talk about trauma from the wound, and then we talk about witnessing that trauma at 3 years old. And fortunately, it was the knife missed her major artery by half an inch. So she was able to recover, and we went into hiding as children, and with the mom on the run. So it was really, really a traumatic experience. And growing up in that, I want to talk a little bit about the inner child, the inner adolescent, and the inner adult. So what happens, so that domestic violence as an infant, that did not allow my brain to formulate normal, like everybody else's brain normally comes together. So now you have fragmented. Then you go into the first piece of domestic violence. And then when we talk about the inner child experienced that domestic violence and that violence period. We get into the inner adolescent, and growing into my young adulthood, I was in an abusive marriage, which ended in a divorce, another layer of trauma. Then we talk about the inner adult, right? I was in a horrific car accident. We talk about another layer of trauma. That's the visual, if you will, of how the layers stacked. So when we talk about that inner child, inner adolescent, and inner adult, the inner child was always on the panic button, always afraid, never in a safe space. So now, when that happens, it's called soul fragmentation. You have a part of yourself that is stuck in that space, right? And we'll get into that a little bit more a little bit later, but just keep that in mind. Soul fragmentation is real. Okay. I know I've been kind of monologuing this conversation. So is there anything that you want to jump in on, or do you want me to continue with hypervigilance?
Well, before you go there, let me think because and excuse me for my ignorance because I just want to ask this question. It may seem like I'm here on the panel, I'm here with you, and I should know everything, and I don't. So let me first. I'm just an ordinary person like everybody else. Um, I didn't realize civilians had PTSD the same way. I always thought PTSD was a battlefield or a trauma that you had in the military. I thought the civilians would, unless they were first responders, wouldn't have PTSD. So when you bring yours out, you open my eyes to a whole new part of this. Because something you said really struck me the most. When you said at 3 years old, you begin to understand what was going on in your family and the trauma of your family. And I can understand why you have opportunities now because the first 7 years of a child's life is where a child learns about family and community. All that time, the child is structured to learn family and community, and that shapes the rest of your life. So in that 3 year period, you had trauma that your life was already formed. Your life had already been formed for that trauma. So I can understand, why you have an issue now. It's clear to me.
Absolutely.
So thanks for letting me know that because I didn't realize civilian complex PTSD was such a real force in people's lives. So thanks for educating me on that.
Absolutely. And I think that's the general consensus. And that's why we're doing this awareness, right? Bringing it to, conversation. And so, in this series of podcasts, we're co-hosting this because neither of us know everything and I'm just, making our audience aware of it. So neither of us know exactly everything, all of the nuances of PTSD and complex PTSD because it's so, it's so complex, if you will, because everybody's experience is going to be different. And so hearing more of the stories about civilian PTSD or complex PTSD, it will help us to understand because as we talked about it in our first episode, when you go through therapy, you're not always given an explanation of what it actually is. So what is complex PTSD or what is this? And so even if we're given a definition of what it is, to actually live that experience and I mean, think about it. We're supposed to be, happy in our childhood, for the most part, being able to explore and knowing that mom and dad got you, that you're not gonna, if you little kids, I mean, I watch my grandchildren and they are, it's like they're fearless, right? because they automatically are built in this whole field of safety. But when you are in such, like I said, a domestic violence situation, coming up in that situation, your whole, and that's when we get into the hypervigilance part where that's developed, right? Instead of developing this sense of the world is, your world is safe because someone has you, you have that's gone, right? Because everything that you see every day is fear, is danger, is unsafe. So now you're on that panic button. There was an episode in, it was not an episode, but it was a documentary when Tyler Perry talked about this. And this really, it brought it home for me. Tyler Perry talked about being in his documentary. He talked about being abused as a 6 or 7 year old. He said he remember holding on to the fence and being beat. And he said he saw himself, he saw the little boy running. And he said, I could not get him to come back. Let's sit with that for a minute. I couldn't get him to come back. That means that part of him, at that age, now a portion of him stayed stuck there until you do the work to bring all of those pieces back together, which I have done that work. Until you do that work, you don't get that fulfilled person, that person that you're supposed to be. You're now operating, your body's still growing. You're still, outward appearances, you're still, 20, 30, 40. But until you go back and pull all those pieces back together, your soul is, you're fragmented all the way down to your soul. And I don't think that point is ever really addressed in therapy.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Imagine driving down the road, enjoying a beautiful day, when suddenly a tree jumps out in front of your car. Crash! In an instant, your life is flipped upside down, both physically and psychologically. That was my reality. I'm Liz Blanding, a certified holistic wellness and trauma recovery coach. In a time when, according to the National Center for PTSD, the epidemic of trauma is on the rise, 70% of adults in the U.S. have experienced some type of traumatic event at least once in their lives. That's 223.4 million people who could benefit from support on their journey to recovery. To address this, I launched the Get Trauma Informed podcast in March 2024. Our podcast offers free information, resources, expert advice, and stories of those who have overcome trauma and shifted from surviving to thriving. The podcast has the capacity to reach hundreds of thousands of people. I believe that by partnering with the Get Trauma Informed podcast, we can provide critical support to many more people who need it. Trauma was not their fault, but recovery is their responsibility. And with your support, we can help them to achieve it. Thank you for considering the partnership opportunity. I look forward to the possibility of working together to make a significant impact on trauma recovery. Email us at info@oasiswellnessctrs.com or contact us at 616-320-0703. Now we will return to our Get Trauma Informed conversation.
What you said when you said that about Tyler Perry and how you explained it, here's how it landed for me. It landed for me because when I first had PTSD, I didn't realize I had PTSD. It wasn't diagnosed, and I didn't know I had it. I knew something about my body or something about my soul, about my mind and my well-being had changed. I knew something had changed when I got back, but I thought that was normal, or I was absent-minded or something like that. Case in point, I would be one to drive somewhere and I know exactly where I'm going. And I'd be driving for a while and I know I'm supposed to turn right. I would keep straight. I would pass my right and would keep straight. And I'm saying, what in the world? And it's that my mind was wandering and I couldn't stay focused.
Exactly.
And that happened a lot. It happened a lot, so much that I started noticing. And I said, what am I doing? And I kind of, the way I dealt with it, I said, me and my dumb self. So whenever that kind of happened, I would say, me and my dumb self, and I'd make the next turn and come on back. And that was what I told myself to get through it. That's me and my dumb self. So I began to blame myself and my current state of living to thinking that that's what it was.
And you just hit it. There's a lot of shame and blame, even self, even to ourselves. A lot of shame and blame. So if we're beating up on ourselves and the society or people around us are beating up on us, man, how do you have a chance until you really come into the awareness and you start understanding the self-care? And I'll say it over and over again. We start to understand that trauma is not our fault. It was something that happened to us. We were collateral damage in somebody else's war path, whether it was a military war path or whether it was someone in domestic violence or just some of the, and then if you think about it, that's unresolved trauma as well. If you talk about somebody that's committing abuse against somebody else. And then we already know, in speaking in the military term, those are some extraordinary experiences that you would have. That's not really our mind, our body. We're not designed to handle that kind of trauma, that kind of an experience. So, and the thing of it is, it depends on our makeup, like our physical, our mental makeup, because one person can have a car accident and not go through any type of psychological issue. Somebody else can go through a car accident, the same, everything being the same, but their mind, their body receives the information differently. And then so they can go through it. And then, I had one of the therapists to tell me that she'd seen people and then she couldn't figure it out. She'd had people that come through her office that she couldn't get out of the bed. And they had been through so much less than what I'd been through. And she said, but my issue with you is that I cannot get you in the bed. And that was because I had this drive about myself and I had it in my mind that God did not say this was my destiny. And I was not going to stop until I was walking in my purpose. And that's where I put the blinders on, and it may look different to other people. And, just so much feedback, so much negative feedback came, but I had the blinders on because I said, this is not my destiny. I don't care what you say. This is not my destiny. I must keep moving forward. And I think that's what she was fighting against, my determination and perseverance. And I'm going to keep going because I know that there's greater. And so that's one of the things that, we were going to really talk about today was the hypervigilance and how that is developed because of all these circumstances and situations that we're talking about, and even going back to your story yesterday, I still think about that in our former podcast when you talked about, being the military part of it, right? You're thinking all day, hey, I'm just going for a drill. And that's what stuck or landed with me. You're going for a drill and all of a sudden you realize, oh no, this is not a drill. This is showtime. So you're not even mentally prepared for it, but now you have to jump into action because, you've been preparing for it, but not really. It hadn't resonated with you, right? And so that's a shock to our system as well. So let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about the hypervigilance part.
Okay.
So hypervigilance is a state of heightened alertness and awareness where a person's nervous system filters sensory information inaccurately, making them highly sensitive to their surroundings. This can cause physical and psychological symptoms. Okay. And can you share some of the ways that you've seen the hypervigilance in your life?
Well, before that, can you say it in layman's terms? Because what you said was a lot of it seemed kind of medicine or doctory or something like that. Say it in everyday terms so people know what you're talking about. Please.
Well, that was actually the definition. So let's unravel it now. That was the definition of hypervigilance. Tell me
in regular terms so I can be like everybody else. I know what we're talking about.
So I think it's your brain over exaggerates a situation, right? Meaning that if something is, let me give you this car example. Okay. If you're driving in a car and somebody screeches on their brakes, right? For a person that's hypervigilant, everything tenses up, and they're they're shaking at that light. They're making itching up a little bit. So it's like the heightened level of everything versus somebody else screeches on their brakes, and somebody that's not hyper vigilant, they're like, oh, okay, what have you. So everything is at a heightened level. It's 10x, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it looks so different to the layman or the person around you. Like, why are you? I'm gonna give you a prime example. And I didn't understand that I was even in this complex PTSD situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I was working at corporate, there was a building that they were imploding, right? Because they were just so we all came in early to look out the big window to see that building implode. Now I knew that was what was going to happen, but as soon as the building starts to implode, and I'm telling on myself, but this is so true, I heard gunshots. That's what the first thing popped in my head. But remember, I came from a violent family, from violence. So that was the first thing that my brain triggered. So as soon as I said they're shooting, everybody started scrambling around and people were going under the desk. They were spinning in their chairs. I caused the whole big scene because what am I? I'm hyper vigilant because of my condition. So that's what I mean about it's 10x. Everything is 10x in your mind.
But let's go back to that situation you just said. Mm-hmm. Now, in that situation, they found out you're the one that said somebody's shooting. Did they come to you as saying, "Oh, this young lady has an issue. Let's call to her, or let's get her from being panicked"? Or they said, "Oh, they blame you." Said, "What the hell? How was that treated?"
Truthfully.
Yes, truthfully, I want to know.
Nobody knew that it was me that said it because everybody started scrambling. So I didn't bring it out. I didn't bring it out. Everybody said, well, what? Everybody's trying to figure it out, but everybody started to scramble because all you have to, somebody say if somebody's shooting, everybody started to scramble. So that's what happened, Yeah. But that's a real life situation of, that was my reality in that moment. Right.
Yes. And let me share mine a little bit because I'm not as formal as you are, Coach Liz. Because the reason being, I try to forget all about my PTSD. And not that I try to hide it. It's just I don't talk about it, and I don't make it aware, and I try to keep it as small or compact as possible. But my hypervigilant is what I'm always on alert from time I wake up in the morning and put my clothes on. The first thing hit me is that I'm not going to get everything done I need to get done. There's something I'm missing, and I keep looking for it. I even have a routine. I gave myself a routine so that way I can stay on task and accomplish. I always feel like I'm always on mission. I'm always on guard. I'm hyper alert. I'm always on alert. And there's two things I'm on alert for. One is that I want to complete my mission, and my mission is to take care of my family and work my little business, and that's the mission. So that has priority in my life from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed at night, is do my mission. And sometimes what my mission is, I don't even know. All I know is I'm keeping busy. The second thing is my family and safety. I want to keep myself safe and my family safe. So those are the things that from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed, that's what's on my mind. And I try to steer clear of places that will make me feel like there's danger or make me feel I have to watch who's coming in, who's going out. And a typical day for me, I'll wake up, I'll get my routine started, and then I'll put my clothes on and all that stuff, do everything I got to do. And then I go out the house and I'll come back, I get in the car, then I'll come back and see that I made sure I locked the door.
Yes.
Even though the door has an automatic lock on it, my mind is it locked? And then I'll go to the office and I'll look around to make sure everything is correct. I'll walk through the office to make sure nothing was taken. And I'm living and working in a little small town. So we got when the police station is less than 3 blocks from my store. So it's very unlikely that somebody's gonna break in or something like that. And I go there and I do that and I work until I can't work no more. When I get up, I I have a set schedule. I go in by 9 and I'm out at 6. Sometimes I don't leave until 6 in the morning. Sometimes the average time I leave is about 11:30, 12 at night. And when I leave, it's dark. No, all the rest of the businesses are closed and all that. It's just that I'm comfortable, I'm safe, and I know what I'm doing if I'm working. If I'm doing that, and that keeps me, because I can't let anybody down. I can't let myself down. I can't let the community down. I can't let my family down. I'm always trying to make sure that I complete the mission. I never came out of the cycle.
Right.
And that's hypervigilance for me. And then if I go, so let's say me and you go on a date, Dr. Liz, then you go out on a date. I'm gonna make sure that I'm gonna watch everything around us. I'm gonna sit so I can watch the door. I'm gonna listen as we talk. My ears are listening to all the conversations around us, and to make sure that nothing pops off, or make sure that nothing happens that's going to endanger you or me during that situation. And I'll steer clear of where the crowds are. I used to do all kinds of. I used to go to outdoor concerts and all this stuff. Don't do any of it anymore.
And it's something how when we're talking about comparison of the military PTSD versus civilian complex PTSD, because most of the things that you just named yourself are things that I am so conscious of constantly. I don't sit with my back to the door. It's very uncomfortable for me to go, someone say, well, which way, where do you want to sit? I'm always sitting so I can watch the door. When you said that about, making sure that you're in a safe crowds or what have you, that's an issue for me as well. Now, I've been forced to do it, or even in speaking, or I've went out to do speaking engagements, and after the engagement, I'm totally exhausted, like I'm totally wiped out, because I'm watching everything, I'm looking at everything, I'm double checking everything. They say it's a man thing to pull in backwards in a parking space, but I won't pull in forward in a parking space.
Right.
It's certain things that I didn't even realize those were all symptoms or signs of PTSD or complex PTSD. I love to be in a close setting. Like if I'm working, I have so many things like around me, so I'm boxed in. And people say, why aren't you just spread out and free? I feel more comfortable boxed in. And now I understand that that's because you've never felt safe, or I've never felt safe. So that is my sense of being safe. And then when you talked about workaholism, on all day long, figuring out, and writing the books and doing the things, and even studying the complex PTSD, the PTSD. Like, I really want to understand this, because to understand a thing, now I can recover from it. But then you get to that part where you say, man, recovery is not just I'm recovered. Now I'm good. I'm back to, no, you're not, because you must continuously do the self-care. As soon as you fall off from the self-care, you're going to go right back down, and that's what I've learned in this whole process. It's an ongoing thing. That's why it's important to build a community around you. The people that you have around you also help you, but part of our responsibility is to educate other people, because people don't really understand this. They don't understand, because you look like you're good. We get up and, do our hair, makeup, do all these other things, and you go out and you present that person is whole, but you're shattered on the inside until you do the work. So it's an invisible scar, if you will. So it's hard for somebody else to understand it. So it's then our responsibility. I say trauma is not our fault, but recovery is our responsibility, because the responsibility then falls on us to be able to educate other people. And oftentimes, because of that shame, that blame, is a vicious cycle. I don't want people to know this is what's going on with me. I don't want people to know that I'm, not 100%. I don't want that. I want to show this whole person. And so a lot of the things that you described about hypervigilance is, I gave the polarizing example, because that tickled me, that I like, oh my God, where did that come from? Because you find yourself questioning yourself.
Yep.
Like, where did that come from? How did that happen? But that's a part of living this experience. And now I understand that the pain was not in vain. The pain was to help other people. to give a voice to this complex PTSD and the PTSD, to give a real voice to it, because there's been so much shame and so much stigma around it. It's like, okay, enough is enough. This is what is happening. Like I said on the other series or the other podcast, 8% of the population is facing this, what I call it silent suffering, right? But once we understand that this is trauma was not our fault, it's an actual injury, and we understand how to navigate through it, we understand the self-care that it takes, we understand that it takes compassionate people around us, people that understand it. So a lot of times, truthfully, it's just ignorance. People don't understand.
Yes.
And it's those false expectations that we not only put on ourselves, but the false expectations that other people put on us as well. So we are responsible for understanding our triggers. We are responsible for educating others around us, so that we do not keep traumatizing and re-traumatizing and re-traumatizing. I think that's what generally happens.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Today's episode is sponsored by Oasis Wellness Center's home of Soothing Salve, an organic pain relief salve infused with over 30 natural herbs. It fights inflammation, provides pain relief, relieves stiffness, relieves dry and itchy skin, and it also improves circulation. Oasis Wellness Center's mission is dedicated to relieving pain, promoting relaxation, and restoring mobility. In order to grab your jar today, contact us at www.oasiswellnessctrs.com. Now we return to our Get Trauma-Informed conversation.
I think one of my biggest problems or biggest issues with PTSD is it made me a fault finder. And that it made me look for flaws in people and situations, in events, in framework. And that made it where I was always on mission and I always looked to make things better. And even at my own detriment, I would see stuff and it would bother me. And I struggle with, like, if I go to a restaurant or go to a movie or something, or go somewhere people and I see trash on the ground, I have to force myself not to pick it up. Okay. And that's maybe something simple, but I see it and I should pick it up, and I got to talk myself out of walking past it. That's issues. And I know what it is. And that's the problem I have.
What about the people pleasing part? The people pleasing part, that you want everybody to be okay. That even at your own, what you said, your own detriment, and that's something that, okay, think about that. At the end of the day, you're tired. If we go through a day and you're talking about all of these measures to make sure that you're okay before you leave the house, and then you're leaving the house. We're not going to talk about the OCD part of it, where you got to come back and make sure the door is locked. I mean, I'll circle back around to make sure the iron was off, make sure that the door was locked, leave out and say, wait, did I do the door? You go back in and you do the door. So do you know how many hours in a day we need to take care of everything? And then to go into that, like I said, the people pleasing part of it, eventually we have to understand, if we are pleasing everybody, we are doing something wrong, because it's impossible to please everybody. Or you're totally depleting yourself. And by the time you finish depleting yourself, you have nothing else to give. And now how can we walk in our purpose if we've given? Lisa Nichols talk about giving from your saucer and not your cup. And when I learned that concept, I keep it forefront of my mind, because my initial response, okay, if I have $100 and you need some here, you know what I'm saying? But maybe that $100 needs to take care of something you need to take care of. But what Lisa Nichols' concept is that when your cup is full and it's running over, you can now give from your saucer, give from your overflow and not from the cup, because if you keep giving from the cup, it's going to be empty. And now you can't. And when they say the same thing about being on an airplane, about the mask, put your air on first. Because if you're giving it to somebody else, wait, that person may not, once they get all that air, they may not return the favor. So.
Yes.
So it's really the intent, and we talked about it on the previous podcast, to build a community of support, build a community. I
Yes,
mean,
yes,
I can't
yes,
I can't imagine how amazing it would be to be able to be in a community where everybody understands. And we're not saying everybody agree, but everybody understand. And if you need that support, you're not afraid to ask for it because you won't be judged. And I think that's one of the key factors, is being judged. Nobody wants to be
yes.
judged.
Yes, my one of my counseling sessions my therapist told me, he said, Rufus, look, let's talk about your personal life. And we talked about that. And he said, how many male friends you have? And I didn't have many, because I kind of make myself a loner now. He said, let me share something with your son. He says, you have to have male friends. He said, that's what healthy. You have to be healthy. You have to have male friends. And I kind of thought about it. He said, well, look, give me an assignment. He just gave me an assignment to start, cultivating male friends. He said, because you have to do that. And I haven't done it yet, to be honest with you, because it's kind of hard to reach out to people and build people. And I think because all my male friends are non-military people that don't, never been through what I've been through, and people that in my circle. So I said, that's hard. So where do I go to have friends of people, or that people that know what I'm talking about? At least understand and I can understand them. We can have that camaraderie. We can share things, or just to understand, hey, I'm not alone. So when you say something like that, that's awesome, because that's awesome.
Right. To have that support, that's a part of the self-care, right? That's a part of the self-care plan, is to have people around you that do understand and that can provide that safe space. Because when you are suffering through or working through your workout plan with PTSD or complex PTSD, a part of that is not feeling safe, because your safety
Yes.
was taken. That's like the root of it, right? The safety was taken away from you. And so, in building out a community where people can provide that support, they can, it just helps you. I mean, it really does. When I really got into people around me, like your associates, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we learn through our training is you must remove yourself from toxic people, places, and things.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, like you said, you don't have many of male friends, but having that male, because it's awesome to have friends of the opposite sex, but to have
Mm-hmm.
someone of the same sex that can really, understand what it feels like to be a man that
Mm-hmm.
has gone through PTSD, that has gone through service, then you really have that camaraderie ship. You really have that
Yes.
connectiveness. You can really
Yes.
understand, and you feel like people aren't talking at you. They're actually going through it with you, or have gone through it with you, and can leave those nuggets behind. So that is the
And,
community that we're cultivating and that we're building. Go ahead.
and I want to say, because there's so many ways we can connect now. We can connect on podcasts. We can connect virtually. We can connect on the phone. We can do face to face. We can do group. There's so many ways that we can connect now, that we communicate across the world easily now. And there's so many ways that we can communicate. So that community you're trying to develop, or you developing, or you have developed, that community can be worldwide, or at least national, because we can reach so many people by Zoom calls. Now we almost like we're all in the same room. So that's awesome. And then that'll give me something to look forward to, whether it's weekly, monthly, or quarterly, whatever it is. I would enjoy being around like-minded people that understand, and we can share stories, and we can just have fun, have fun with it, knowing that, we're not alone, that, the person beside me, or a person I see or talk to, or some of the questions we can ask, because you've given me, I've taken notes. I took notes on our last podcast. I'm taking notes on this podcast. A lot of interesting things you have said, because my shortfall I see now, I'm not doing the self-care. Listen to you talk. That's a shortfall I'm having. I'm not doing the self-care. Because of that, I'm getting bigger, my belly's sticking out, and all this kind of stuff, that I'm not doing the self-care. I've got bags under my eyes. I'm tired.
And
And my
see, this is
body's
the
beginning to break down,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. That you hit it right there on the head with the self-care. That's the biggest part of it, in putting together your own self-care plan, right? And that is a part of, when we talk about different modalities of care, that's what we mean, putting together that personalized self-care plan, one that's with the SMART goals, that's realistic, that you can actually obtain. And then once you start doing those things, like, I'll give an example for me. Because of my accident and because of the extensive physical and psychological injuries that I suffered through the car accident, I must keep some physical activity going, right? They said I plateaued, so there was nothing else they could do for me. So it did fall into my hands. So I have to walk, I have to stretch. If I don't, my legs tighten up, right? They lock up on me. So I know that this is something that I must do in self-care. Now, yes, when I said that about if you don't keep doing the self-care stuff, or you don't keep moving forward, your recovery is not a one and done. The recovery, this is a lifetime commitment. And, if you think about it, it's really not a bad thing to care for ourselves, but that's a part of the PTSD. See, some of this stuff is kind of latent, it's kind of ingrained in it. And a part of that is not taking care of ourselves, right? Not getting the proper sleep, not getting the proper nutrition, pushing through, because even in that workaholism, when we're doing all of that, that is a part of anesthetizing the pain that we're truly going through, because it's now something I can control. This, I can cut this off right now, or I can keep going, right? And so that's a part of the dysfunctional habits that go on this. There's a cycle of addiction, if you will, right? And trauma is a part of that. So even those unhealthy habits that we have, if we keep doing that, we'll go in this cycle. We'll have this craving to do the work, continue to work, because it makes us feel good. It releases some feel good hormones in our body, because I'm controlling this. But then what happens when you've worked that whole almost 24-hour day and you haven't gotten any rest? Again, it's still taxing on you, right? So the workaholism, the gaming, the sex, anything in excess, anything that you're doing over and above, that becomes something that you're using to anesthetize the real pain. And a part of that is what we do. We isolate. All of these things are keeping us on that cycle of addiction. Then we get this remorse. Man, I'm exhausted. For me, my cycle goes, I overwhelm myself. And once I get to overwhelm, then everything starts to fall apart and you got to rebuild it again. And then as you're rebuilding, you're like, you're feeling good. I'm not going to do this anymore. Then what? You stop exercising, stop drinking your water like you're supposed to. Then all of a sudden that cycle starts all over again. But if you have that community around you to remind you, and nobody wants to be told what to do. We want to be supported, right?
Yes.
So if we can be supported and it has to be a gentle manner. Sometimes, and I know coming from the military, it's like, rah, 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 in your face, get it done, right? But that does not work in an area where we have felt unsafe, right? And it's good to have men aboard, because men have always been taught you have to be this armor, this strong, super duper X-Men kind of thing, where it's sort of shunned on to have emotion and to be able to let those emotions out. But that's toxicity when you keep all of that buried in. And that toxicity will eat you up from the inside out. So this is what the Get Trauma Informed movement is all about. And yes, we want to bring live events. We want to make sure that everybody feels supported and that it is a part of your self-determination, that you get excited about being a part of the Get Trauma Informed movement, that you get excited about having a support, excited about having a roadmap, a blueprint, right? We're bringing out an 8-week program that's going to help us beyond the battlefield of trauma. And it's going to help us to be able to put that self-care plan together in a supported community.
All right, let me give a caveat. Everybody, I want to make sure the audience understand, but there is a place for the professional counselor, professional therapist. There is a place for them, and then they're needed. There's a space for them. There's needed, and you should seek that professional help. And that should be one of your first lines of getting your recovery started. But like Coach Liz says, you still need to be supported beyond that. I have two psychiatrists that work with me. One, I get the one that does the medical part, prescribing the prescriptions. The other one is a therapist, the civilian one that actually helped me sort through some of the issues that I can't go through myself, help me to understand. But even all of that, I still need to support someone that has been through what I've been through that can support me long term. Because if I don't have that, I'm by myself. I stick to myself. I don't reach out to people, and I suffer in silence. And I've known a lot of military people that have been through some of the same things I've been through, and what they suffer in silence, and they self-medicate. These are people that drink themselves to death or do drugs and kill themselves through drugs. And this is happening every day on the military side, because I've known some of my friends have done that. And that hurts when that happens, because you lose people that you know something about, that you knew. And how do they get help? A lot of times they don't once they had the initial consultations with the doctors and the therapists and professional people, that was great, but they didn't feel like there was somebody there that knew what they've been through and they could reach out to. And that's why it's very important that you get all of it, all of it, from the medical side with the therapist and mental health side. And you need the support, constant support. And that's all. I just wanted to share that, Dr. Liz, because I've heard of too many people that died behind self-medication and suffered in silence. There's no need for that today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in sharing my experience as well, like I said, as far as the accident and everything, I did go through different therapists. And again, this is like, we have to take our own care in our own hands, and decide what path is good, is going to work for you. For me, coaching did so much good for me. I could receive because I was a part of it. And so it just, and like you said, going to see a therapist, it helped put me on the right track and help me understand some things. Seeing, my coaches, for myself, holistic wellness was my option, and it's a choice, chocolate or vanilla, we decide, but it's all about doing something. Not just thinking that if I ignore it, it's going to go away. That was my problem for many years. And I think that's probably why therapy didn't work for me, because I was in denial, right? I felt shame. I did not want people to know. I didn't even want to accept it for myself. I said, no, I can push through this. I can get through anything, right? But a part of going through the coaching and actually meeting yourself where you are is saying, okay, this happened to me, right? So now, instead of saying it happened to me, this happened for me. This is pushing me closer to my purpose. I wouldn't be talking about this today. I wouldn't have the podcast. There's certain things that wouldn't have happened or come about had these things not happened. So I'm saying that I mapped out a plan for myself, and I am grateful for it, because now I have a self-care plan. I work with it. I'm working with amazing, incredible people that are a supportive community. We're building this movement. And so I think sometimes it's a mindset thing. It's a shift. We have to paradigm shift that, not hide, because a part of the PTSD and complex PTSD pushes us into isolation. Yes. Because then we don't have to deal with it or face it. But now, if we deal with it and we face it and we understand that we're not alone and there is a safe place for us to land, I think we'll have a better outcome. And lastly, yes, I want to conclude with that, there are a lot of 12-step programs all over the world, right? And through our training, we had to attend some of the 12-step programs. And the one thing, or the thread, that I kept hearing people say is that we need more. Like, we need more. We need to be able to talk about our situations, our circumstances, our issues, our challenges, our good days, our bad days, but we need more. And what we are, the community that we are putting together is that more. It answers the call of more, because what do I do after I've talked about it? Yes, it's good to get it out. Yes, it's good. It's therapeutic to write it down. But what do I do after that? There are different modalities, is what I can say, or different ways for us to implement a self-care plan. And that's the answer right there. Self-care plan, and having it in your mind that this was not my fault, right? And I do have, there are solutions. So did you have any concluding thoughts? I mean, this is not our normal podcast. We are actually having a conversation about the experiences that we have gone through with both military PTSD and civilian complex PTSD. And so, so that's me dropping the mic for today. But did you have any concluding or final thoughts, sir?
Left it all on the battlefield.
Ooh, we all on the battlefield. All right. We'll see you all next time. Bye for now. It's time to buckle up. No more suffering in silence. Our Power Pack journey to recovery and realignment starts now. Remember, you were collateral damage on someone else's warpath. Trauma is not your fault. Recovery, however, is your responsibility. I'm your host, Wellness Coach Liz Blanding, and this is the Get Trauma Informed podcast.